talking about how when you're in this water and you're writing in the moment and the poem kind of follows your thoughts, how does that work in the revision process when you go back to a draft? Like, what if you can't? Like, what happens?
Yeah, well, sometimes those moments are lost, but I think as long as I have a material to work with, I'm fine with that. So if we're just talking about like the generative process, which is a response to like, again, a bumper sticker, sometimes the poems wind up not being that. If I talk again about like the Malcolm X poem, in my initial sort of relationship to the poem, I wasn't thinking that it would really be about my brother, but inevitably he became sort of a major figure in the piece, and that was in the revision process. And again, that revision process is the thing about like, I know I'm going to go upstairs and I know I'm going to work on something, and that is revision, but it's sort of open-ended revision. It's not like, again, I'm going to finish something. It's just that I have a piece, and it's going to shift, and it's going to morph, and I probably won't remember what it was initially, and I'll lose track of it, but that'll be all right. So, yeah, I mean, the revision process is very separate from that generative process, I think. Yeah.
How do you know when something is finished? You're just sick of it, or?
I don't know. I don't think I know, really. I don't know when I'm finished with it, but you have a sense of when you can read it out, I guess. So there's poems in there that I think, like, had I not put them in a magazine or something like that, I probably would still be working on them. You know, there's this weird thing that's happening now, and I think this is like the first sign of like people becoming terrible poets. But you know, like twice in the last year, there was a poem. I shouldn't say the name of the places either, because the people that put these poems in these places are proud of these poems. So I sent out batches of poems, and then I was like, oh, here's a poem that I worked on, and then I sort of abandoned. Like I thought if I go back to it, it'll be finished, but it really wasn't finished. But then there were other poems. So it's like 3 poems. I'm sending it to some random place that said, will you send us work to publish? And then I think, okay, this is the good poem, and these are the drafts of poems that I've abandoned. Right. And then in 2 cases, those, not only did they publish them, those poems appeared in anthologies. Ooh, should I say that? Woo. Like I'll say it, like the Best American Poetry 2010.
So wait, you're telling us that, okay, we really hate you now. You're telling us stuff that you don't even think is that good is in the Best American Poetry.
but then this is why people start going downhill, though, because it confuses me. Because what it means is like, are they putting this in because they want a poem by
Terrance
me?
Hayes, right,
or if they're putting it in because it's good, it means I don't know what's good.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right, yeah,
so that's
exactly.
one, and there was another one, but the other, I won't say the name of the other place, but it was Pushcart. But so both cases, I thought, I've never read these poems out like I thought. I mean, I still haven't. I haven't read those poems out because I thought, you know, they're all right.
Right.
So, and now I'm thinking, well, maybe, I mean, those poems could have been in the book, and I didn't put them in the book. Right. But I said, I'll just fill up this envelope with some other poems, so they'll leave me alone. So it's hard to know. And I do, I mean, honestly, and this is why I sort of didn't want to say the places, because I think that the people that are picking the poems are honorable people, and they think that they're good. Yeah. But to me, I sort of feel like I would rather trust my own sense of like, I need to know that even if I'm wrong, I have to sort of trust my own sense of what is a good poem and what's not a good poem. So I still haven't read them out. Right. Even though I think like those are fine poems, you know, you can have them. And again, like, I mean, I guess to go back to that question, like, if they were terrible, I would never send them out. Right. So I think that they're almost done, but I've sort of just abandoned them because I have some sense that there's a bigger thing that could happen. Right. But I can't do it.
Well, and that's the thing. It's not that I'm sure they're excellent poems. It's just that you know what they could be, whereas other people see what they are, which is great, right? So that's different. But that's good. I think that obviously that is good for an artist to always have that. Yeah,
and that's the problem. I mean, I'm serious about like that idea, like the slope down, because I don't want that I don't need that to happen. So the only thing that I learned in it, because I did it both, I sent them out both right around the same time. And the only thing that I've learned, particularly now with things like awards, is that I just can't send out anything. So now, like, you know, since it's happened, there's like 5 people saying, send us poems. And essentially I'm saying, well, I have one poem that I know is done. Right. And I got, like, you know, 20 other poems that might be done. And now I just feel like I can't send them to people because they're not going to give me a real sense of.
Well, that's true. I mean, do you think people, because I'm sure these are honorable people, but we all are, we're influenced by, right? I mean, once someone has been, again, anointed, right? I mean, you had a poem in the New Yorker, which is fabulous, which I read, quite honestly, before I read this, and before I kind of knew who you were, and I thought, this is a great poem. It's just like a couple of weeks ago. That's right. So, but yeah, I mean, once an artist has appeared in the New Yorker, it's hard to read him objectively.
Yeah, well, the power dynamic changes, because if the typical dynamic, and again, this is true for across the board in art, there's a moment when the person that is receiving the art is the authority. So the editor at the New Yorker or wherever, you send it to them and they say this is good or this is not good. But then if you like Lennon MacArthur, or if you are a best-selling author. You're Toni Morrison. Nobody's going to look at Toni Morrison piece and say, if a person doesn't like it, they'll say it's something wrong with me. Because it's Toni Morrison.
Which is what I say.
Right. And so, but I think like an artist needs to have that sort of like push and pull, because I don't think we know. Again, my sense is always, I'm struggling from one poem to the next. Like, I don't ever know if I can do it again. So I always have that kind of uncertainty that I appreciate as an artist. So when I send it out, I'm happy if somebody says, oh, I don't know if it's finished. I might not always agree with them, but I need that kind of like relationship. But that's why you sort of can only trust, inevitably, a very small circle of people.
I was going to say, do you have readers, or do you have people who you know will tell you the truth?
My wife is one of those people, but with my wife, it's just like body language. Because even she, and again, it's sort of the burden of like awards or whatever. Because even my wife sort of thinks now, oh, yeah, I think you know what you're doing. I think you'll figure it out. But if I read her something and she says, I think you know what you're doing. I think you'll figure it out. And that pause, you took too long to say that.
Right.
So it's that, like it's all unspoken now. And I mean, we've been together long enough for me to sort of get that. So I can sort of push her to talk about things. So she is the one. But even with her, it's still a dynamic of saying, am I qualified to talk? And I'm like, yeah, you can read. You know, you have an opinion. That's all I really want.
Right.
So it does get trickier, but that's sort of the only thing that I've really thought about. Even before the award, it was connected to those other poems, because I just thought, like, this is really confusing. You know, I should put those things in the book. That's what I was thinking. So.
I want to get another question, but I just want to say, since we're on the subject of your wife, I love the way you write about your wife and about marriage.
Right.
And I was talking to Lighthead about that, and I don't know why it struck me so much. It struck me so much, and I was thinking yesterday, maybe it's because we read a lot of poetry about love and lust and even divorce. One of my favorite poems is that poem, do you know, Everyone Forget Icarus Also Flew. Do you know that poem? I can't remember the poet. It's just it's the incredibly beautiful poem about divorce.
Right.
But we don't see a lot of poems about marriage. At least I don't.
Right.
So, you infuse it in through a lot of your poetry, and it's just really wonderful.
Yeah, but that's the water again. That's just being in the water of marriage and thinking about it. But this would be a thing too. So like the first poem in the book is the last poem I wrote. It's Lighthead's Guide to Marriage.
Yeah.
And there's a line in there where sometimes when I kiss my wife, I can taste her caution. I can't remember the lines, so I'm looking at it. There's some line like that. Sometimes when I kiss my wife, I taste her caution. And so, I showed her that poem, and then she read it. And then, a day later, she was like, oh, I saw that line. Sometimes I taste her caution. And that kind of thing. But we have a relationship where it's fine. All the anxieties again, and doubts and questions and fears that come into marriage. So I would say it's her. Like, she allows me. Because she doesn't really write about me, really. Occasionally, she'll have poems where a figure, resembling me might show up. And then that would be sort of a different way to be right. But I feel like, and I said, well, in the same poem, it's like, I'll eat you to live. That's poetry. So it's like, I'll eat up everything. I'll consume everything.
That's the line that got me.
To be a poet. So, of course, when I kiss my wife, she's cautious. Like,
what's
going on? So
that's a great line.
There's a relationship there. But, it's this part of, again, being submerged in the kind of like day-to-day existence and trying not to sort of separate those things. But I could talk about sort of the moral dimension of that kind of, everything is susceptible to the poem, everything goes into the poem. I feel like my only obligation is to like really make it art. So I'm not a person who sort of thinks, you can write poems at the mercy or at the cost of other people. So it's my parents, it's my children, my wife. So I put them in it, but I think that increases the pressure of it really being complete, being like a full poem. Because if it's a full poem, then it sort of illuminates the relationship, and it's not confessional, and it's not exploitative.
It's not selling them out. That famous essayist Janet Malcolm, who said writers are always selling somebody out.
Yeah.
She wasn't talking about poets, but writers in general.
Right, and that's the pressure. I mean, to try to like get past that point where you can actually write about something that feels true to your day to day, but also to like make it more than just a kind of like diary entry. I think. Right. So as long as that's happening, I feel like I can write about it. I can write about them. Because the other poem is there's a later poem, also a Lighthead poem, which is about sort of being a parent. And it's like if you're disciplined with your discipline, your child will love you as they will someday love God. It's like, okay, you could be disciplined, but be disciplined. And so to me too, that's just sort of like again, anxiety about raising children, but it too fits in the poem with questions about religion and spontaneity, all these other kinds of questions about just being a grown-up, I think.
Right. That's excellent. Anyone else? Other questions?
You designed the book cover. My ears kind of perked up because, like, I'm in the fiction program here at Emerson, but I've worked as a graphic designer. I was just kind of curious what your thoughts are just on the synthesis of, you know, written work and just visual media.
I mean, so I always come across as a person who's not kind of a control freak, although maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people think I am a control freak, because I think I am. But that means, like, I do compartmentalize things quite a bit. So I've never actually done anything that was an overlap of my own interest as a visual artist and as a writer, or music even. Like, I've never written song lyrics, because I think of those things as so separate, even though I feel like the way that I take in the world, what other people are doing, I love those overlaps. But for me, it's so hard to sort of make them come together. So at some point, it will happen. But so, like, graphic novels, I'm really interested in that whole genre, even though I feel like, you know, on some level that would be perfect for what I'm interested in, because I like doing ink drawings, and I do them, but I just can't figure out, or somehow, like, the pressure I feel to make one sort of a valid art form. I feel like somehow there's too much competition between the two. But if I go back to this question of sort of like deadlines, in the absence of saying my career goes until then, I always think, oh, at some point, you know, I'll be able to figure those things out. Of course, I've been saying that for like 20 years now. But I do. I mean, I think, well, inevitably something will happen, and then I'll know how to make the things sort of work together. But generally, I don't. I mean, I appreciate other people's capacity to blur genre lines, but I'm not a person who can do it with any real comfort. So, does that answer your question? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of at the same state myself. Right. I really haven't merged the two either. So.
Yeah, but I wish I could. I mean, I like other people's capacity to do it. You know, Lydia Davis, who did Blankets, Craig Davis, and Lydia Barry, Craig Thompson, right? You know, so I'm interested in like the capacity to tell narratives, and you know, even when there's no words, like, you know, Alden Nielsen, this kind of, what is that guy? Is he like Scandinavian or something? He barely uses words. So I'm interested in it. I just can't do it.
Is this oil?
Yeah, that's oil.
So when do you find time to paint?
Well, I started taking classes, but when I go to the classes, I just put my earphones on and just paint, so I don't really talk to all of it. This is also a class with a whole bunch of elderly people in it. So, because it's like, you know, it's like 9 to 3 in the middle of the week, so only retired people and people who don't teach on
that day, right?
To do it. So I try to work it out. I try to, like, you know, stay in practice and paint, but I do still feel mostly out of practice. Mm-hmm. So, but you know, I think like it's very telling, the things that I paint, which are always faces and bodies, and mostly, you know, male faces, and that, I think that's sort of what my subject matter is too. You know, it has something to do with like having a little brother. So there's always these two guys doing something in the poems, and I think like the biggest indication for me is that in some way that's sort of also the subject matter of my painting, I think. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
When you, like in Wind in the Box, when you write a poem, say after Kool Keith, right, or after Harriet Mullen,
right?
With Kool Keith, that's like referencing an artist who's actually using his voice and sound and projecting a certain kind of persona. But with Harriet Mullen, we're actually talking about the written word. So, what exactly are you calling upon for the reader to identify or misapprehend when you say after, say, a vocal artist versus after a written artist?
Right. So that's interesting. I mean, because what I think about first is like my mom's ability to imitate people all the time. So I think like without ever even realizing it growing up that I too could imitate people a little bit. So when I think about those poems, I'm thinking about sort of Kool Keith's general energy, his general way of being. So I just think, okay, like Kool Keith is going to crack jokes and he's going to talk about his butt. So I'm going to see if I could do that too. So it's sort of just trying to like be in his position. And the same thing with Harriet Mullen. I think, oh, she's sort of quiet and she likes punning, but she's also sort of clever in a less flamboyant way than a Kool Keith. It's really interesting to think about both of them together, like at sort of opposite ends of the verbal spectrum. So, but essentially, I mean, this is how I write. Like again, it comes out of reading and it comes out of sort of just engagement with things that I love. So I look at that. I don't separate that from like saying David Bowie. I mean, I think like I wrote a poem called The Blue Bowie, and it's sort of in the spirit, in the voice of David Bowie, sort of talking to David Bowie. But it never occurs to me that that's something that I can't be writing about. Like with Kool Keith is not something I should be writing about. So with Kool Keith's poem, I mean, it's mostly him, shooting these one-liners, and then Harriet Mullen's poem is sort of a more political poem, really, at the end of the day. So I feel like they too give me an opportunity to sort of go into these other areas of poetry that I'm interested in doing. Or even like there's a poem called The Blue Baraka, and this is in Wind in the Box. And same thing, like when I think about Amiri Baraka's quips and his political sort of fervor, I think, what would be the context for me to write a poem like that, other than just pretending to be Amiri Baraka, And I think that still, it carries over to Lighthead too, because so when I talk about like wanting to be a novelist or wanting to use the novelist tools, what you wind up with is a poem about Malcolm X, because that's me still thinking about like what are the strategies, what are the ways that novelists work, or how do they structure things, and thinking about how that can be used in an extended form.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about the fact that like with Kool Keith, if you're not familiar with him,
right.
There's something very distinct about his voice,
right,
and the way in which those offbeat rhymes operate in terms of cadence and rhythm.
Right.
So like I hear his voice when I'm reading it, I don't hear you.
Right.
And with Mullen, I guess I don't necessarily identify it with a rhythm or a cadence that I know. It's really more or less the punning.
Yeah, that's right. It's just employing those strategies, I think, to see what happens in them.
Yeah, I had that same experience because you do here The Last Train to Africa after Elizabeth Alexander, who I've read, and Wendy is very close to her, and I've interviewed, and I love her poetry, and I got the sense of. But do you actually use the last line from one of their poems? Because you do also after Gwendolyn Brooks
same
from
thing. Like
We Real Cool, right?
We Real Cool is in the column of that poem.
Yeah.
So if you read down the sort of, if you read down the last words, it is her
Oh,
poem.
I get it. We real cool. We left school. We lurked late.
Right.
Brilliant. Wow, that's awesome.
And in Elizabeth's poem, it's a response to a poem she wrote called Ladders, and she has these, and she's using a sort of like alternating rhyme in that, so I'm writing towards it. But that poem would be in her poem, it's like two women shopping, I think. And so in that poem, it's like two guys, going to see a girl or something like that. So, but I use the structure as a way to sort of like, again, pay homage to people who interest me, I think. January?
Well, I have a question. You started talking about the golden shovel. Could you expand on that? Like, I just think it's a very creative poem.
Right.
So, can you talk about the process of, did you play around with the lines? Did you think about using Gwendolyn Brooks' poem, starting the lines in the beginning, the front of the lines instead of the end?
Right. So this is the thing about like going up, right? Just like, and I always say going up because literally my office is right above the bedroom. But I like saying it because I think of the creative process as, going up and trying to like make something happen. So I do think it just happened over, I think initially thinking about it, there was a point where I had at this point he was probably 5. He was memorizing We Real Cool, which is not necessarily like the most upbeat poem. We lurk late, we strike straight, we jazz June, we die soon.
We die soon.
But he had it memorized, and so we were going around, and every day he would say it to me. And I think at some point I just thought, oh look, it's such a small poem, you could write it all the way down. And then I know that I wrote more. This actually be this thing about like drafts and when poems are finished. I wrote several of them, but I'd never thought of them as poems. It was an exercise, essentially. So in one of them, I was thinking like, my dad used to take me to the pool hall all the time, but I can't play pool. So I sort of start there because the Golden Shovel is the name of the pool hall that We Real Cool sort of, it's for these guys, 7 at the Golden Shovel. So just from that relationship, I write it. And then I thought like part 2 of that poem is sort of about like that, sort of the essence of like we jazz June, we die soon, the essence of that sort of like existential African-American, a certain age. So like 1991 is sort of trying to go at like late adolescence for African-American men. And then I wrote others just sort of going at the poem, thinking about it in a bunch of different ways. And inevitably I thought, okay, I'll keep these 2. Of course, when I read that, I only read part 1. And I think like if I kept the book for another 2 months before sending it to my editor, I probably would have gotten rid of the last one. Yeah, and it's not because I don't like it. It's just, again, like the way that the poems are always sort of in flux as you're working them out. But the key thing I want to say is that it just started as me not thinking about it in any sort of real smart or clever way. It was just me sort of thinking, We Real Cool is in the house, so now when I go upstairs tonight, I'm going to be thinking about it because my son just said it to me. And then I play with it, and then I just let that play be what it is, as opposed to sort of saying, you know, I can or can't do these things.
Would you read it?
You want me to read it now? Okay. So, yeah, but here's the poem that's in it. We real cool, we left school, we lurk late, we strike straight, we sing sin, we thin gin, we jazz June, we die soon. So if you ever heard her read it, she does this weird things with her we real cool, we left school, we. I don't know what's up with that, but that's performance. That's Gwendolyn Brooks was a performance poet. So this one, 1981, which would put me at about the period when my father was taking me to these pool halls, you know, like 10 years old. When I am so small, Dad's sock covers my arm. We cruise at twilight until we find the place the real men lean, bloodshot and translucent with cool. His smile is a gold-plated incantation as we drift by women on bar stools with nothing left in them but approachlessness. This is a school I do not know yet, but the cue sticks mean we are rubbed by light, smooth as wood, the lurk of smoke thin to song. We won't be out late. Standing in the middle of the street last night, we watched the moonlit lawns and a neighbor strike his son in the face, a shadow knocked straight. Dad promised to leave me everything, the shovel we used to bury the dog, the words he loved to sing, his rusted pistol, his squeaky Bible, his sin. The boy's sneakers were light on the road. We watched him run to us looking wounded and thin. He'd been caught lying or drinking his father's gin. He'd been defending his ma, trying to be a man. We stood in the road and my father talked about jazz, how sometimes a tune is born of outrage. By June, the boy would be locked upstate. That night, we got down on our knees in my room. If I should die before I wake, Dad said to me, it would be too soon. So I typically would just read that one. And then, you know, at one point, again, just to think about like the sort of fluid nature, at one point, the reason I dropped all the other sort of drafts, like writing towards her words, is like I thought, okay, that was sort of narrative, it's sort of a story, and then the other one I thought of as more like sort of lyric and more song-like, and so I wanted to take more liberty. So in this one, like it's ethereal instead of real, or it's weekdays, but I break it on the we, or it's straightened, it's straight. And so this is like part 2 that I never read out. Into the tinted cities we go, weakened by the fire's ethereal glow, born lost and cooler than heartache. What we know is what we know. The left hand severed and schooled by cleverness, a plate of weekdays cooking, the hour lurking in the afterglow, a late night chant, into the city we go. Close your eyes and strike a blow. Light can be straightened by its shadow. What we break is what we hold, a singular blue note, an outcry singed, exiting the throat. We push until we thin, thinking we won't creep back again. While God licks his kin, we sing until our blood is jazz. We swing from June to June. We sweat to keep from weeping. Groomed on a diet of hunger, we end too soon. So you know, it's fine that it's in it, but I know, and it probably would be over-editing, in fact, but I know when I look at it, I know because I don't read that part that much. And sort of, you know, it's a sort of weird pressure, but I think, well, if I'm not reading the poem that much, it probably shouldn't be in the book. It's that kind of thing that I think. So, yeah.
That seems like probably a good place to end it. We want to let Terrance rest his voice because he's got to read this evening. But this was a wonderful, I want to thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation. We could go on forever, but we want to give him a break. So thank you all for coming. I hope you all come back.
Thank you.